Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. NFL schedule release day, yesterday American time, 1 o'clock in the morning UK time. I'll admit it now, I did not stay up to 1 o'clock in the morning to see the schedule, because, you know, we already know the opponents that we're going to be playing. I mean, some cases we know half of those opponents, you know, halfway through the previous season. So I'm not going to be sat there at 1 o'clock in the morning eagerly waiting for the schedule. I'm not one of those people. I get it though. I understand why, you know, the schedule release day at this point has become arguably one of the biggest events on the NFL off-season calendar. It is a lot of fun. You do get some good schedule release videos, but the Browns video certainly wasn't one of them. Didn't really understand the reference. I've been told it's apparently something to do with a viral video from 2021. Either I'm not well versed enough in internet lore, or it's been that long that I can't remember it. But even if it was that funny of a viral video, it's 4 years ago, seems like a long time to wait to do the inspiration for it. Didn't really understand what was going on with the video. Probably one of the worst that I've seen from any NFL team. So it is a shame, because the Browns have had some, good ones the previous few years since it's kind of become the trend around the league. They've had a couple of funny ones, but this one certainly was pretty bad, and not really one that I understood or was a fan of. But as I said, I'm not the biggest fan of the whole, I'm not going to get so excited about schedule release day because we already know the opponents. It's just the order of it. But it is still interesting to, of course, see what prime time slots your team's going to get, what away trips you're going to get, and all of this stuff. The way it all falls can be a lot of fun. So I do understand all of that stuff, and I am obviously going to talk about the Browns schedule, just give my initial thoughts on it, kind of go through the order and all of that stuff. But first things first, when it came out, I mean, the Browns schedule, as I said, we already knew the opponents. We already knew this was going to be a tough schedule because, as I said, we already knew the opponents. We knew what teams were coming up. So no matter what order it was diced up in, it was going to be a difficult schedule regardless. And I'll be honest, with that being said, it's still, when you look at it, think, oh, that is a pretty brutal start to the season. You've got Cincinnati Bengals, Ravens, 2 division games to start off the season. The Packers, the Lions, the Vikings in London, and then the Steelers. That is a pretty daunting first 6 games. Pretty difficult start to the season. How you start a season can be a massive indicator on how you go on. And the Browns start the season 1-5, 0-6, then you could probably make a pretty good bet that they're not going to finish the season with many wins. So pretty tough start, not going to lie. If I'm honest, after seeing that, with all the talk about the quarterbacks, who should start and all of this stuff, if it was me, I think I would just offer, Flacco or Pickett as a sacrificial lamb, just to start the season in that kind of gauntlet of a first start of the season and first quarter of the season. And then you can start one of the rookies after the bye, because, I've said before, I wouldn't want to start any of the rookies week 1 anyway, even if the Browns do believe they have a potential starter there. You'd prefer them to not be thrown in at week 1. But this would just make that even more of an argument for that as well, because, as I said, pretty daunting first kind of quarter of the schedule for the Browns. But overall, all 17 games, I think it's 13 1 p.m. games Eastern time. So I know quite a lot of fans don't seem to like that over in the States, but for me in the UK, I'll be honest, I'm not going to lie, this is my favourite time slot for the Browns to play a game, because I'm 5 hours ahead, apart from the 2 weeks in the season where the clock's going back kind of change in different dates. So I think it's 2 games a year where it's a 4-hour difference, but more times than not, it's a 5-hour difference. So 1 p.m. over in Eastern time is 6 p.m. over here in UK. Sundays, of course, it's a school night, it's a work night. You don't want to be up too late if you're not able to get work off the next day. So for these games to finish at night between 9 and 10 o'clock is pretty good for UK fans. So 13 1 p.m. games, I'm happy as a UK fan over here, but I can understand why some people might not be too happy with that. And I mean, they even have an earlier game than 1 p.m. with the London game, of course, kicking off at, I think it's 9:30 a.m. over in the States. So as I said, whether it's coffee or beer, that's going to be a pretty early one, regardless. But no primetime games. Are we that shocked? Probably not. I wasn't. If the Browns were going to get any, it was going to just be a Thursday night football against the Bengals or the Ravens or the Steelers. That was what they were going to get. I wasn't expecting multiple primetime games, but to not get any primetime games, all I just said previously about, of course, I'd rather most games be at 1 p.m. Just because I'm 5 hours ahead. You would also like to get at least one primetime game. I can book 1 day of work rather than 17 dates off within the season. So it is nice to have one of those Monday night football games against the Steelers, or a Sunday night football even. But no primetime games for the Browns. So maybe they can prove people wrong and show the NFL that they should have had more primetime games, and maybe some games later in the season get flexed. But the NFL clearly don't believe in them. There's 3 teams this year that did not get any primetime games. That is the Browns, the Saints, and the Titans. So a little bit surprising with the Titans, of course, drafting Cam Ward. You'd think maybe they'd give him one just for that kind of TV slot, but nope, they didn't get one either. So those 3 teams are every year there's a couple, and they're the 3 teams this year. So let's see if any of them can prove the NFL wrong for not giving them any. But going back to what I said about, of course, the 1 p.m. games, the latest game of the season for the Browns this year, if it stays as it is and none of the games get flexed, then the latest start will be 9:25 p.m. UK time. So I might actually get some sleep this season, because I think that's a first. I don't think there's been a season since I've been following the Browns where I've not had to stay up later than that for at least one game. So 9:25 p.m. UK time, that would do me. As I said, I might be a lot more well rested next season than some of the seasons previously. And I suppose, kind of in relation to the Browns having no primetime games, the Browns are currently only favoured in one game next season. The current bookies odds, they have all of the future offers and that stuff, future bets, and the Browns are favoured in one game, and that is against the Titans. So take that as it is. Maybe it's Shadur Sanders versus Cam Ward. That would certainly make an interesting storyline, but that is the only game the Browns are favoured in. I could maybe argue they should be favoured in a couple more of those, but again, so similar with the primetime games, are we that surprised? The Browns went 3-14 last year. You're not going to be favoured in many games this season following if you only win 3 games. So it is what it is. As I said with the primetime games, if they're angry about that, they'll have to go and prove people wrong, but including the bookies. But the actual full schedule itself, if you haven't seen it, I will just go through the schedule and kind of just give my kind of thoughts of the way it's fallen down. So start the season at home against the Bengals. Always love to play the Bengals early in the season. They do seem to, in the Joe Burrow era, they've been, pretty slow starters. So to play them in the first game, you could argue, is probably one of the best times to play them. But then, as I said, to add to the kind of the daunting start of the season. You then go to the Baltimore to play the Ravens. You then play the Packers at home. Then you go to Detroit to play the Lions. You then play Minnesota in London, so that is not a home game. It's an away game for both teams, but it's still an away game for the Browns. And then you go at Steelers the following week. So, as I mentioned with the no primetime games, that means the Browns have no Thursday night games or Monday night games, so they don't really get any mini buys this year. It is just straight up week, a normal game week, a 7-day game week before, in between every game. So they're not going to have any chance, as I said, for any mini buys. And, to have those technically 4 away games in the first 6 games, which are already difficult games, is pretty tough, especially, as I said, with all of the travelling and stuff like that, and no mini buy in between it or anything like that, including the tough opponents as well. I've said it multiple times. That's a very difficult first 6 games, and could argue it couldn't have really shaped out that much worse than that, to be honest. Not great. But at least all the games are at 1 p.m. other than the game in London, 9:30 a.m. 2:30. That will be over here in the UK, and I will make sure that I'm there and giving you guys live view of that game here in London. But after that, they then play Miami at home and then travel to New England before they have their Week 9 bye. So probably the only kind of good thing about this schedule, I suppose, is the bye week. I don't really like having an early bye or a late bye. I kind of like having it slap bang in the middle, and you can't really get any that much closer than slap bang in the middle, than especially now that we have 17 games and it's a longer season than Week 9. So I like that. That's one of the things I do like, having the Week 9 bye. They then come out of the bye and go to New York to play the Jets. Then they play the Ravens at home. Then they are going to Vegas for the Vegas trip that I'm sure many Browns fans will be making, and I hope as many of them as they can make it will. Because if I could make the trip to Vegas to watch the Browns, I certainly would. So that would be a great trip, regardless, win or lose. So as I said, hopefully as many people can make it to that one. And one of the few games that is not at 1 p.m. this season, that is 4 p.m., which will be, again, very manageable 9 over here in the UK. They then played the 49ers at home in Week 13, the Tennessee Titans at home in Week 14, the only game they are favoured in that season. Then they travelled to Chicago to play the Bears in what I think you could, if you look at this schedule, I think you could say that's probably the easiest stretch, is the Titans and Bears back to back. Other than that, they don't really have, and that's, I expect the Bears to be good next season, don't get me wrong, but based on kind of last season's record and stuff and how last season went, you could argue that's probably, other than the Jets, Patriots, but with a bye in between, or maybe the Patriots, Dolphins, you'd probably argue that's the easiest stretch on paper, and that just kind of goes to show that this is a very tough schedule, because that is not a very easy stretch. They then play at home against Buffalo in Week 16, Week 17 at home against the Steelers, and then to be decided the date. I imagine it probably won't be a primetime game. Final game of the season, the Cincinnati Bengals. So you start the season with 2 divisional games, and you finish the season with 2 divisional games. I said one of the only things I liked was the Week 9 bye. I might add this to that. That might, I like that. I like that. We all love AFC North games. So to start with 2 and to finish with 2, is pretty cool and should be fun, regardless of how the Browns season, goes. I don't think many people are expecting that many wins. This expectations have been low most of the off season anyway. As I said, we already knew the Browns' opponents. We knew this was going to be a tough schedule for the Browns. I think they're like second or first on most of the analytical models for strength of schedule in terms of most, the toughest. So we knew it wasn't going to be easy. Now the schedule is out, and we've seen the dates of these games and stuff as well. I think most people are probably throwing out 5 wins as kind of the ceiling here. I get it, and it's hard for me to argue that much against it. With the Browns, at the end of the day, it comes down to not having a quarterback, and that's this would completely change if one of these rookies or Kenny Pickett or something can come in and look like a competent starter or like a plus starter, and then obviously your expectations will increase. But in terms of the current Browns roster, the way that you don't know who even the quarterback is, it's hard to look at this schedule and think there's more than 5 wins. The optimistic side of me would say that last year I picked the Browns to go back to the playoffs, go have a deep playoff run. Probably the most confidence I've had going into a season, arguably in my Browns fandom, and they went 3-14. So it always seems to be when I have high expectations, they're terrible. And when I have low expectations, they actually do surprise me. So, 2020, one of those examples when they won 11 games and, made their first playoff appearance in a million years. So, that's the one optimistic side I have, is that maybe just because I think it's a very tough schedule. As I said, the Browns are not in the best of circumstances with the roster, especially at quarterback. Maybe that's just one of those things that turns out being a weird combination, and the Browns actually go and win 9-10 games. You never know. As I said, there's if one of those guys can be a plus level quarterback, a starter at quarterback, the Browns should have a pretty good defense next year. They've got a few weapons on that offensive side of the ball and potential for more guys to grow behind them. So if that does happen, then there's no reason why you wouldn't say they would win that. But as I said, completely understand why now in May, people are looking at this schedule and thinking, there's probably not many more than 5 wins there for the Browns. But finally, before I finish, because this year it's not kind of just one team's schedule and win-loss record that I'm going to be keeping my eye on in terms of my Cleveland Browns, but the Browns of course made a trade in this year's NFL draft and acquired a first round pick for next year off the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I will be hate watching the Jaguars every week, almost as if they are the Steelers, and hoping that they lose every single game. And I had a look at their schedule. I'm sure many Browns fans have had a look at their schedule, because I'm sure many Browns fans feel the same way that I do about that. And, hoping they lose as many games, go 0-17 and give us the first overall pick. But as I said, looked at their schedule and pretty interesting. That's a pretty tough start for Jacksonville. They start the season against Carolina, which is the easiest of that opening stretch. But, Carolina, Bryce Young kind of took a massive step forward last year. They've got talent on that roster. They could certainly surprise the Jaguars. And especially on the first, week 1, it's just one of those weeks. We always get kind of, how many seasons have we had a team that was terrible the year before, beat a good team on week 1? It's just, you never know what can happen in week 1. But then, as I was saying, they then travel to Cincinnati to play the Bengals. They then play the Texans. And then they play at 49ers. Then they play the Chiefs. Then they play the Seahawks. Then they play the Rams before their week 8 bye. They could easily enter that bye week 1-6 or 0-7. And if that's the case, they've got a young GM. They just hired their coach. We all know how kind of reactionary that ownership group is in Jacksonville. Shit could easily hit the fan pretty quickly. If they're 0-7 going into the bye, that could be a recipe for their season to blow up. And that's not even me putting this as like this is a slight. You look at that schedule, as I said, the Rams, a playoff team last season, a great playoff team, could have made the Super Bowl. The Seahawks, are a good team. They didn't make the playoffs last season, but they improved their roster. They brought in Sam Darnold. They already had a pretty decent roster anyway. The Chiefs, Super Bowl last season, of course, lost, but we all know how good the Chiefs are. The 49ers, yes, had a disappointing season last year, but it's the 49ers. I think we all expect them to bounce back and be good again. The Texans, they're a better team than the Jaguars. The Bengals, they're a better team than the Jaguars. And then, as I said, the Panthers, that's a coin flip. I'm not going to sit here and say that Jacksonville is definitely going to win that game. So easily could see a scenario where they're going into the bye either 1-6 or 0-7, and then, as I said, shit could hit the fan, and maybe their season goes downhill, and it does get a little bit easier for them after that. But then it's not that easy. After the bye, they then go to Vegas to play the Raiders. Then they play the Texans again, Chargers, Cardinals, Titans, Colts, Jets, Broncos, Colts, Titans. Arguably the easiest, of course, opponent on that is the Titans, and that's a divisional opponent. And as bad as the Browns were last year, they still won 2 divisional games. So there's no reason why the Titans couldn't at least win one of those games. So, as I said, we're all going to be hate watching the Jaguars next year. So when their schedule was released, to have a look at that, I was pretty happy to see the way that theirs fell, because if they're going to win a lot, if they're going to lose a bunch of games at any point in the season, I want it to be early, because, as I said, 0-7 going into the bye, it's a firestorm in Jacksonville. The building will be on fire. So hopefully that is the case. We'll have to wait and see. But as I said, I'm going to be hate watching regardless. But that would do it for me today. As I said, I think we'll probably do a kind of more, prediction of win losses and stuff like that closer to the season. I'm not going to sit here today and go through all 17 games and give my prediction for each game and come up with a record. As I said, it's difficult to find that many wins in it, but the closer we get to the season, we'll have training camp to look at. We'll know more about these quarterbacks, and we can make a better judgment of that. But for now, just wanted to kind of give my initial thoughts on the Browns schedule for 2025. Daunting start, pretty tough schedule, but you never know. It's the NFL. But as I said, that would do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy, because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing rest of the week. Weekend is soon. Weekend starts tomorrow. Have an amazing weekend. But most importantly, go Browns.